Um, I was asked to give this presentation on the early history of the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. Um, I had done a shorter version of this back in 2018, so I already had the slides for that. Since then, I have put together a one-frame exhibit on um, basically MPS postal history, corner cards. Um, it wasn't a full 16 pages of corner cards, but it was close to it. The problem that we have in trying to recreate the history of the Milwaukee Philatelic Society over the last 125 years is that a lot of its records are lost. Um, and so it's not something where we can just come in and pull out a box of dusty old files and go through them and pull out things that you want to find out what happened back in 1909 or something. Just can't do that. So you have to recreate it little bit by little bit, and that's what I've tried to do so far. I have some things. I have some interesting things. I have some interesting questions. There are even some controversies that you might not expect, but politics sometimes gets involved, even in philatelic societies. So anyway, let's start if I can. Come on. There we go. Okay, so the MPS was organized in November of 1899. That's only 13 years after the American Philatelic Association was formed in, I think it's 1886. We were able to find this in McKeel's Weekly Stamp News, which is an announcement of the organizational meeting. It was organized by a group of these six who were, I think at the time, young men in their late 20s or 30s. Don't know enough about, or much at all about some of them. Know a little bit about some. Mr. Youngman, don't really know anything except that he apparently was still active in the Milwaukee Philatelic Society as of 1929, so 30 years later, as shown on this letter or this envelope from the secretary of the society, dated May 2nd of 1929. We do have a copy of the the list of members as of 1935, and he was no longer included on that. So he must have dropped out or perhaps passed away in the meantime, but at least as of 1929, he was still around. Frank Enders, sorry, another one. He's an interesting character. He was an artist. He founded a studio here in Milwaukee. He was known for his paintings of Jones Island in the late 19th century, and he was a founding member of what became the Wisconsin Painters and Sculptors. Here's one of his paintings of Jones Island, which at the time had an active community living on it. Right now, we know it as being where they store the big piles of salt and where they have some shipping out of it. But at the time, there were a group of people who made their living through fishing and lived on the island. Robert Shoddy, he also was an artist. It's interesting that so many people who were attracted to stamps at the time, so many adults, since it was basically considered by non-philatelists as a childhood pursuit. Uh, but so many of the adults who were attracted to it were artists. Um, he also taught at a Milwaukee art school and also was a founding member of the Society of Milwaukee Artists. And this is one of his pictures. Obviously, he specialized in still lives. Emil Philatelic, I don't know how to pronounce that, but as of the late 1890s, he was the only stamp dealer in Milwaukee. And the name of his, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. C.C. Johnson will come up later. But right around this time, very early 1900s, the first big controversy that I'm going to talk about arose. Found this in the American Philatelist, owing to a controversy which took place at one of the regular meetings of the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. And there is a whole article about it. And what the controversy was over whether you should collect the entire envelope with the postal markings and the stamp complete, or whether you should just tear off the stamp, soak it, and just collect the stamps. And luckily, there were people like Mr. Stern, who insisted on collecting the entire cover. Or those of us who collect postal history and focus on postal history would not have something to collect. And, you know, especially when you look at how many stamps were torn off and soaked off from this era, so many of the Columbian stamps, for instance, that could have been on a really nice piece of postal history. It's sad what is, you know, missing to future generations. At some point, I'm going to try to get the rest of this article. I have the rest of the article. I'm going to try to get it and maybe submit it to the Badger, the Wisconsin Postal History Society magazine, or the magazine for the Postal History Society in general. Okay, at the time, a second kind of controversy arose. Well, but I'll get to that in a minute. At the time, the American Philatelic Society was not called the American Philatelic Society. It was called the American Philatelic Association. And around the time 1900, they actually had their meeting, their annual convention here in Milwaukee. And we see that of the 6 founding members, 5 of them were members of the American Philatelic Association. Enders apparently was not. I didn't find anything indicating that he was. The APA convention took place in Milwaukee, as I said, in 1900. It was at the public library. The organizing committee was those 4 gentlemen. And here is the cover for a philatelic stamp collectors magazine at the time, the Weekly Philatelic Era. And for those who don't know, at the time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were dozens and dozens of stamp collecting magazines or periodicals. Newspapers, some came out weekly, some came out monthly, some came out bi-weekly. They would start up, they would get a few subscribers, and then they would just fail. So there were magazines like this or periodicals like this that would last, one or two issues, maybe a year, something like that. I don't remember how long this weekly philatelic era lasted, but it's a really nice picture there of the public library where the APA convention was held. Here we have a certificate that we actually do have. And it indicates that it certifies that the Milwaukee Philatelic Society was authorized as Chapter 24 of the American Philatelic Society on August 10th of 1907. As of July 1908, there were 55 American Philatelic Association members in Milwaukee. That may amaze people at this point, but the APA membership for Milwaukee was the highest in the nation in proportion to its size. And there were more APA members in Milwaukee than anywhere but New York City and Chicago. So Milwaukee was definitely a stamp collecting town. A lot of members, a lot of members who were willing to put out the money to join the national organization. Okay, the second controversy. Early on, there was apparently a debate in the Milwaukee Philatelic Society over whether to be an affiliate member of the American Philatelic Association, the national organization. We know that because a separate Milwaukee Stamp Club was formed, and that separate club, known as Chapter 24 of the American Philatelic Association, was organized on May 9, 1907. This is a separate organization from the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. I haven't found anything yet explaining why there was the disagreement, whether it was personal or political or what the issue was. But the fact is that there were two of them. Their meetings were in the Kraft Sanitarium on 9th Street. I have not yet been able to, look up where exactly that was or what it was, but they met twice a month. They had lady members, or at least the APA had lady members, and lady members of the APA in the Milwaukee area were deemed honorary members of the Chapter 24. What this suggests is that they could not be full-fledged members. And I don't know for sure when that changed. Now, going back to this certificate, we see there are some problems with this. And I can go through those. First of all, it's headed by the American Philatelic Society. However, the APA didn't become the American Philatelic Society until 1908. And as we saw, this was granted, Chapter 24 was granted affiliate status in 1907. So that isn't quite kosher. We also have the president who signed the certificate, Donald Leibarger, but he was the APS president 1943 to 1946, I think it is. So this certificate likely happened during the American Philatelic Society convention in Milwaukee in 1944, not in 1907, as it purports to say. So the question is, when did the Milwaukee Philatelic Society actually join the American Philatelic Society? And when did the MPS combine with APA Chapter 5? I don't know, but there are some clues. about when it happened and when it had finished happening. February of 1908, the APA Chapter 24 begins meeting in Turn Hall, that's now Turner Hall. And according to the minutes that month, they voted to send a letter to the Milwaukee Philatelic Society inviting it to combine with APA Chapter 24. Then we have this postmarked March 10th of 1909, which is the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. They also are meeting in Turn Hall. So both clubs are meeting in the same location. And then we have this postcard, a membership postcard that was sent out June 9th of 1909. And if you can read it right down here, the next meeting, June 11th, report of consolidation committee, which I take as being the committee who is negotiating combining the two organizations into a single organization. However, November of that year, the report of Branch 24 still has a different president. It does not mention the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. And at that point, they've moved their meetings to the Germania building downtown, which is a beautiful building. Milwaukee Branch 24 was last listed in the APS reports in November of 2010. There was no listing for Milwaukee between then and 2017, or 1917, sorry. So the last time they're noted is 1910. Next time when Branch 24 is listed, which is in November of 1917, it's listed as the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. So sometime in between there, the two organizations merged. We just don't know exactly when. Okay, we talk about Milcopex, and Milcopex started in 1967, I think was the first year that we had Milcopex. But that wasn't the first stamp exhibition put on by the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. Here we have an exhibition put on in April of 1912. And it lists in the article from McKeel's the various exhibits that were shown at the exhibition. Note that these exhibitions were most likely just the exhibits. They would not have the dealer bourse the way that we do today. And here's another exhibit or exhibition that they had the following year. And also note that it was a full week where they have these exhibits up. It's in the Milwaukee Public Museum, which at that time was combined with the Milwaukee Public Library in the same building. And they give the kind of exhibits: Thurnan taxes, British colonies, South Americans. What's interesting is there's only one lot of US stamps shown, and that was a revenues exhibit. So it's a wide variety of things, but very few US exhibits. Okay, what I have in this next section is a group of corner cards. Corner cards are the printed section over here on the envelope that usually gives a return address. It gives the name of the organization who's sending out the envelope. These are things that I've picked up, here and there over the years. And the interesting thing about them, the most interesting thing for me about them, is the changed corner cards but also indicating, most of them indicate, the name of the secretary who was sending out the mail for the organization. So even though we do not have full lists of members for most of these years, we can pretty well track the name of the secretary throughout this period of time. This one, I am assuming that Louis Novotny was the secretary, but since it doesn't indicate that, or whether he was some other officer of the organization, I just don't know. And this is kind of unclear, the actual year date. So I'm assuming it's 1911, based on what I can see, but I might be wrong on that. Next one, we start with FW, I think it's Fred Noske, was secretary in 1921. Also in 1921, the APS had another convention in Milwaukee. This was not a corner card, obviously, but a program announcement. And on the front, it has the list of officers for the year 1921. Dr. F.A. Kraft, William Eline was vice president, Noske was secretary, and L.A. Burmeister was treasurer. Now, this is a recent discovery I made. It is a kind of a rubber stamped, rubber stamped cachet or corner card, and also includes rubber stamped Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the bottom, which probably was used to make it easier when you're sending out dozens of membership letters, just to make it a little bit easier, to automate it a bit. I do not know who the secretary was at that time. It probably was Noske, but we just don't know for sure. Okay, at this point, Dr. S.G. Keller, who previously had been president, these corner card, you see his name right here under Milwaukee Philatelic Society. These are both the basically the same corner card. This is a different style corner card. It's a different font, but it's still Keller. And that's from another year. Here we have 1927. Keller is still the secretary, and they switched to a non-serif font. This is the first that I found where the Milwaukee Philatelic Society used a kind of a graphic design. And it's interesting, it's shaped like a stamp. It gives us the organization date. It doesn't actually say Milwaukee Philatelic Society on it, but it does have the MPS in the middle. So we know, and given the organizational date, we know what it is. And this is R.L. Hustis, switched to him as secretary. 1929, we switched to A.C. Weiss, and a lot more pedestrian kind of corner card there. Here we go back to Noske in 1929. Another thing kind of interesting about the officers at the time, they actually had contested elections. So they could have as many as 3 or 4 people running for president, a couple different people running for vice president, for secretary, treasurer, and that. Not the kind of thing that you would expect nowadays. Uh, this is a little flyer um, that I found that gives the officers here. Again, Keller, he percolated back to the top again. William Eline, we'll be talking about later. Never saw anything before about Mr. Byhoff um, or Mr. Lanke, but Weiss is there as secretary treasurer. Um, but this gives on the back the meeting dates. And for a couple of them, the program that's going to be held on that date. But for most of it, it was um, just the date when they were going to meet. Okay, Albert Draves was a secretary here. This is obviously incoming mail rather than a corner card, but it's interesting. It's coming from Paris, secretary of the Milwaukee Philatelic Society, and the address, 1931. Here we start with Jacob Levin, a very pedestrian. You can use that no matter who is secretary by just replacing their address. The only reason I know that this is Mr. Levin, since it is not included in the corner card, is because I've seen another corner card with his address on it. Here we have a lot more interesting corner card for the Milwaukee Philatelic Society, and C.W. Degler as the secretary. He will be the secretary through much of the 40s and 50s. I'm not going to be boring you with every single corner card that he has. The first Milwaukee post office opened March 16th, 1835. And so the Milwaukee Philatelic Society, or 16th, yes, 1835. So the Milwaukee Philatelic Society created this rubber stamp cachet to honor and memorialize the 100th anniversary of that opening. You will find this on a couple of different corner cards. I've seen 3 or 4 of them, but it has Solomon Juneau. It has his cabin. There is a kind of a reproduction of that cabin in Juneau Park along the lakefront. And this is a picture of Juneau, I believe. And this is a copy of the original cancellation or circular date stamp that was used at the Milwaukee post office. One of the members, excuse me, one of the members of the club back in 35 was very into collecting early Milwaukee postal history. So he was able to put together this handout that was actually included in the envelope that on the prior screen of what are they called? Not etchings, but sketchings of the cancellations from early Milwaukee postal history. That was sent out to all the members of the Milwaukee Philatelic Society. This is something that we do actually have in our records. This is from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, September 17, 1938. And it appears to just be, here's this interesting stamp club. They hold auctions, and so they're doing kind of a, pretend this is what what the auctions are doing, and everybody's pretending to be bidding on the same piece. Somebody in the past put names to each of these people, except for, I think it's this one, nobody knew who it was. And I've put those on the side. The reason why I have the blank before Mr. Keene is that there were two Keenes, according to the 1938 membership list. We have 1935, we have 1938, and then I think the next one we have is 1970 for membership lists. Okay, personalities. I'm sure that we should consider the original founding members as personalities, and already talked about the two artists and what they accomplished and did. Another personality who you probably have already heard of before was William J. Eline. He was a member of the Eline family that owned the Schlitz Brewing Company from 1875 to 1976. He was an avid stamp collector. Obviously, what you've seen already, where he was mentioned a couple of times as an officer of the Milwaukee Philatelic Society, he's was active in the organization, and also he would host receptions for the organization at his home. Over his collecting career, he amassed 22 albums consisting of something like 40,000 worldwide stamps. And he donated that collection to the Milwaukee Philatelic or the Milwaukee Public Library in 1928. That is, last I saw, it was actually in the Milwaukee Public Museum. And it was in panel, but this was 20 years ago. It was in panels that you could pull out from the wall and see the individual stamps. I don't know if anybody has seen that recently, but he had kind of a good deal. He donated it to the library, and then he volunteered as the curator for his own collection, or what had been his own collection, from then until he died in 1932. And finally, I don't know if anybody knows who this is. He is a rather famous person in the philatelic world. It's a guy named Benjamin Miller. He was from Milwaukee. He was an attorney here. I don't know if he was a Milwaukee Philatelic Society member. I haven't found anything to indicate yet that he was, but he was an attorney. He was in practice with his father, and they started a firm that became Foley and Lardner, one of the biggest law firms in Wisconsin. But he retired early. He began collecting stamps at age 61 in 1918. At one point, it was thought, or at least I had been told, that he had a complete collection of U.S. stamps up to that point, or the point that he collected to. But there's some suggestion now that he was still missing a few stamps that were listed in Scott catalog. So it was nearly complete. He donated his collection to the New York Public Library. For a long period of time, it was publicly displayed until I think it was in the 1970s, 150, somewhere around there, of his stamps were stolen. So they took even though they ended up getting back, I think, 80 or so of the stamps, they took it off display. And then in, I think it was 2007, the National Postal Museum did a two-part display of his collection. One part for a year or so, and then another part for another year or so. And there was a book published, basically a catalog, that I have not had a chance to read yet or get yet, called Rarity Revealed, that was produced by the National Postal Museum. And in going through some stuff, I found in 2013, Marianne had actually arranged that at Milcopex that year, we could buy a copy of that book for $10. It was usually sold for 35. Unfortunately, I didn't spend the $10 to get it. So now I'm looking for the book. I'd like to just read it and read the write-up on Mr. Miller to see if there's any information that I don't already have. But anyway, one of the most famous parts of his collection that is now in the public library, the New York Public Library, you might have heard of something called the 1868 1-cent Z grill. Usually that's in connection with people like the Mystic Stamp Company and that, but Mr. Miller had his own copy. There were 2 copies of this, so unfortunately this is no longer available to collectors. This one, might look familiar. This is the one that is still in the public realm, that when you come up with a few $1 million, you could probably buy it. But that's way too rich for my blood, and I prefer postal history. So that's what I had to show. And I am more than willing to try to answer any questions if people have any. No questions?
Hey, Bob, this is Blaine. Back on those, that like collection of that they put together for the different symbols or Milwaukee cancels. I'm not sure if you called it Milwaukee cancels.
Yeah.
But they had different spellings of Milwaukee in there?
Yes. Yeah, sometimes it was spelled IE, like they do in Oregon. I think sometimes they spell it just with an I. Let's see if they have.
If you could bring that up again.
Yeah, let's see if I can find it. Okay, it was not after that. There we go.
Yeah, and then there was a page that had them all for different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Yep. IE, EE.
On the screen on.
Yes.
Are you showing the one envelope, or are you showing the multitude of?
I'm showing all the cancellations.
Okay, I guess
See
maybe
that?
my screen is frozen, or does everybody see that?
Well, yeah, my screen has the corner card that shows the IE spelling on the cachet.
Right.
Yeah, just the one card.
He's looking for the insert page.
Yeah, and I was showing thought I was showing that.
That's not on our screen.
Okay. Let's see. Stop that and let's try it again. Come on. Okay, so there we have that again.
There it is.
You have it
we got
now?
it. Yeah. So those are cancellations by the post office?
Yes. Yeah, they're postal markings. Some of them are circular date stamps. Some of them look like duplex cancels. Some are just cancellations. Some are paid. Free is if it's I think at that time it was still postmasters still had the franking privilege. So a postmaster could send something for free. These are indicating the amount due. The numbers. Let's see. Yeah, and remember in 1835, there were no stamps yet. They
Gotcha.
didn't come out until, was it 47?
Something like that.
So you would either have, the amount paid, you paid it ahead of time, or it was sent postage due, in which case they would have these number markings.
Yeah, I was just finding it interesting that the IE versus the EE,
Yep.
when it changed, or did it go back and forth depending upon the post office, or when did it become permanent? I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know. I know that early on, a lot of town names were not real settled, and I don't know for sure when things
Sure.
actually settled down. There was a time, I think it was 1883. I'm pretty sure it was, but it might have been in the 1890s. But the U.S. Post Office tried to simplify things. For instance, where there was a town that was known as, for instance, in my Iowa County, Carroll City, they convinced the towns to get rid of the word city to simplify things. And I think at that time, they probably also simplified spellings.
Okay.
But this obviously was a lot before that.
My guess is that the Wisconsin Postal History Society, with all of their information that they have online, would probably answer some of those questions about when the spelling.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. And by the way, this same printout here was on the front page, I think, of a Badger Wisconsin Postal History Society newsletter. At some point, I know that I've seen that. I just don't remember when it was. So
I have
anyway.
a question.
Sure.
I have a question about the brochure that you showed. It looked to me like it was promoting the club itself. It had the Cape Triangle on the front. On the
Yes.
other side, I would be curious to know, was that a listing of the programs for the year? Do you know what's on the back side of that?
Yes, I have that. Oops, there we go. Sorry, went past it. There we go. Yeah, it mainly was just the meeting dates. I didn't scan it off because it was just the meeting dates. But yes, we do. I have the whole item.
I was just curious to know, if they had listed a program title and person who gave it or
No,
that.
no. What I did not include in this presentation because I was concerned that it was going to get too long is that their meeting notices would be sent out on penny postcards. And the secretary would type up what was coming up on the meeting. There would be, an indication of who would be doing the program, what it would be about during this period from the 1930s to 1950s. Those, come up pretty often. I have maybe 3 dozen of those various dates. And I've seen stacks of them, like 50 in a stack that would be interesting to get a hold of and at least copy, so we could try to get some idea of what was happening back then. What they generally would do is just have somebody bring in their albums and go through the albums, and then they'd have an auction. Sometimes it would be more elaborate presentation. But I think that somebody did do a Cape Triangles presentation earlier on. I just don't remember who that was. And one other interesting thing that I ran into, a lot of these, people in the clubs had no problems with, giving out their addresses. There would be newspaper articles, for instance, one from the Evening Wisconsin back around 1900, where they were talking about, collections of various people, in the $10,000 to $15,000 value range. Like Fred Bradell, a civil engineer living on Farwell Avenue, or William Gers and Robert Shaddy, with their address. So, I would be concerned, especially since by today's, numbers, that $10,000 to $15,000 collection, just by regular inflation, would be between $200,000 and probably $350,000, if not $1 million or more. So I would have been very concerned, about just giving my address and the newspaper that you can get for, a penny or a nickel or whatever. And anybody on the street could find out where you lived. So, another thing I forgot to talk about, the convention back in 1900 that was held here. At that time, Milwaukee was known as a convention town. It was a town where businessmen from Chicago would take the ferry up to Milwaukee for the weekend for conventions or just to party. At that time, the mayor was this guy called David Rose. All the time Rosie Rose, he would call himself. And Milwaukee was known for, houses of ill repute, for alcohol, things like that, Mr. Rose was very corrupt. You know, there were laws against this stuff, but as long as Mr. Rose was getting his cut, why would they, you know, try to shut it down? That finally was shut down in the early 1900s, when you may have heard about the fact that Milwaukee has had, during the 1900s, long periods in which they had socialist governor or socialist mayors and city council majorities. These were the sewer socialists, the ones who weren't so much trying to change the world as they were to make sure that all the people in the city had access to clean water and operating sewer systems and parks. One of the reasons we have so many parks is because of, you know, those socialists who ran the government for long periods of time during the 1900s. But that put an end to the red light district and Milwaukee being known as such a big convention town at that point. Okay. Any other questions?